Opopco Studios in Oklahoma City, this is OU Basketball with Mike Baldwin. I'm Jenni Carlson. Mike, as we talk about OU Basketball, let's start with the women. A close call on Sunday, nearly beat a fantastic Baylor team. You were there. What were your impressions? This was such a turn of events from that game in Waco where the Sooners trailed by 40.
Yeah, I think this was one of the most entertaining games I've seen in a while. Both teams played really well. I think Baylor has a chance to win the whole thing. I would favor them over UConn, Stanford, Tennessee, some of those. They have so many weapons around Griner, the Wilt Chamberlain, as we called it, of women's basketball on Sunday. And then, the freshman point guard scores 37, or Baylor may not win Sunday. But it shows you the upside for this OU women's team. The problem is, like you pointed out, they were down 40 at UConn, down 40 at A&M, down 40 at Waco, but they get them in their own building. They're 14-2. That's the thing that worries me a little bit when they get on the road here in the postseason is they won't be in their own building, but they have that potential. They've reached back on that against A&M, at Baylor, and Lloyd Noble, but when they've gotten away from Lloyd Noble, this team's been very vulnerable and hadn't really shown the toughness that you need in postseason. That's why it's going to be interesting to see how this team plays in Kansas City and in the postseason.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because right now they're probably not a top 4 seed, which is where they've been for several years now. Where do you project them, and what's sort of the talk right now about where they might end up? Because there's no home game for the Sooners in the NCAA tournament.
No, there's not one in Norman this time around. Their RPI is in like the early 20s, 21, 22, 23, so that means they're probably going to fall in the 4, 5, 6 range, which means the second round's close to a toss-up. When they're hitting their three-pointers, they can beat anybody. Their inside game is improving. They put their own version of Griner in there. Not quite as good, but Nicole Griffin's really coming around. They're developing a little more of an inside game, a little more balance here late in the season. That's why Sherry, I think, is a little optimistic that maybe they're peaking at the right time. That's why I think Kansas City, if nothing else, will reveal some things about the NCAA tournament just because we get an early glimpse of what they're looking like late in the season.
Well, let's talk about the OU men for just a second. It continues to be sort of an up and down struggle for them, but some games here this last week before they go to the Big 12 tournament. Talk about what's on the agenda for the Sooner men as they head towards the end of their season.
Well, they've lost 7 in a row, and so everybody's like, boy, woe are the Sooners. Well, look, 5 of those 7 are going to the NCAA tournament. Nebraska's a bubble team that could almost maybe have an outside shot, and OSU at one time, as the other loss, was a team in consideration, so the schedule was just brutal. This week they go to Texas Tech, only 2-5 at home. Oklahoma State comes to their place for a Bedlam rematch on Saturday. They're 0-7 in the Big 12 on the road. As I wrote today, I think the carrot for the OU men are if they get at least one more win, they'll match last year, and they won't have the worst record in 30 years, Billy Tubbs' first year. So they have a little incentive there, just one more win, whether it's Wednesday, Saturday, or even next week in the Big 12 tournament. They've played really hard. Every coach has come in there and said that. They're just not quite as good talent-wise as some of these other teams that are going to the NCAA tournament, and yet they've pushed them pretty hard, stayed within striking range. But I think Coach Capel really wants to see them get at least another win or two just because of how hard they've continued to work despite the losses.
Any chance they make one of these non-NCAA tournaments, an NIT or the CBS tournament that's out there too?
Well, you don't have to have a winning record to get in those, but the NIT, despite removing that criteria in recent years, still has not invited a team with a losing record, and then that other new tournament has a couple times. But part of that is you have to buy your way in, 60, 70,000, and you need the fans to show up. Whether OU would do that or not, I don't know. I doubt it. I would guess Kansas City's their last trail, so to speak, this year, but there are those outside long shot chances out there if they wanted to spend a little money, but I doubt it.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hey, stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.